I actually like I do too. I really like it's just you go to class and yeah, that's right. I think that was so like but I really commented no problem.
All right. So this is us. So anyone like to pray before we start? Please.
Oh, Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you for this day. Lord, we thank you for who you are and just all that you've done for us, Lord. God, we just ask that you would just come into this room right now, Lord. God, that anything heavy on our hearts, Lord, any distractions, Lord, anything in this day that's been weighing us down, God, I just ask that you would remove it, Lord, and that we would just sit in your peace, God. But I ask that you would open our hearts and open our minds, Lord, to receive the words that you have for us today, God, that you would bless and anoint the teacher today, God, that we would learn from him, Lord. We just give you all the glory and all the praise. In Jesus' name, thank God.
Amen. So as you may have noticed, this weekend I was not at the service, and I was not in class on Monday. So I had a last minute invite to this workforce incubator for Head Start, and so they flew me out to California. We met with Google people, we met with Disney people to talk about innovation and Head Start and all this kind of stuff. So I thought that was really cool that they asked me. And it also felt really good to be helpful in a space and an organization that helped me, right? So I was a Head Start kid too. So being a part of that was like really cool. So I went out to LA and then on to Anaheim and did a bunch of stuff with those folks. And I will tell you that the most interesting thing happened during the presentations. So Google's using Google Slides during their presentation. And guess what happened? They stopped working. Have you ever used Google Slides and like it didn't work at the clicker or other stuff? It happened to them too. So that was kind of funny that Google didn't work for Google. You know? So there was that. How was service on Sunday? How was that?
It was fun.
It was fun. Okay, what made it? What about it was fun?
The energy, the passion, everything.
Okay. Yeah, my wife texted me and told me that Sarah, who is a Bethel alum, who's leading one of the songs, that she really she sang. Not just sing, but she with the A sang like Pat, And she texted me, she was like, she sang this Sunday. So good. Any other things about the environment? What was the message?
Don't be afraid to ask.
Don't be afraid to ask. Okay, cool. And ask.
And you pray and ask God.
Okay, so pray and ask God. All right, cool. Because I was about to ask somebody for some more money. They're like, I need a raise. Jay Lawrence, I'm not afraid to ask. So cool. Yeah, anything interesting that you noticed about that? About the service, or was it similar to services you've been to? Your own service? Was it different? How was it?
For me, it was very similar to my church.
Okay.
There are a lot of times where if I closed my eyes, I really couldn't tell if I was there at my place. So for me, it felt like home, which was really nice.
Okay, cool. It felt like home.
The offering portion was just totally different from anything that I've ever experienced. I thought it was really cool.
Okay.
Everybody kind of starting from the back row and everybody standing up and really making it a celebration. Like what it's meant to be like, I feel like in a lot of ways, and what its purpose is for. So I thought that was really cool.
Cool. Other things? Yes.
It was just kind of interesting to see people like excited about God, excited about their salvation. You know, here they are up north, you know, the people don't get excited.
They don't get excited. Yeah, it's too cold to get excited. Yeah. Other folks, other things you noticed or? Yes, please.
Felt really personal. Like, I mean, there was one time where he was telling, like, worship God, you know, and worship God doesn't mean you don't watch other people worship God. You know, like, really just kind of stuck. You know?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you just feel awkward about it. And he eliminated that, you know, and he was inviting.
Then it's a participatory thing, right? Have an observation.
And how people would, you know, if he got going on a rant, you know, they would jump up and start, you know, preach, you know, you know, get up and they jump up and down. I've never been a part of that.
You haven't experienced that in this class? No, I'm just kidding. Preach. Yes, all right. Good. So I did put an invite to some of the eldership to come and talk about the experience. If folks have further questions or whatnot, and so we'll see how that goes, and if they have time to do so, they certainly will entertain questions. And then on Monday, you had a guest speaker, right? What did you think of the guest speaker? Didn't think of him?
He's interesting to listen to.
He's from Texas.
And the state of stuff.
Texas and Gustavus. That's it. Did he tell Gustavus stories?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was cool. Okay, cool. You know, he's not a college professor, so like mixing stuff up and doing activities and stuff like that that's not. You know, he's got milk on his breath, right? Like he's new. Right. Yeah, just similar, you know. But what points did he kind of bring out or talk about, or?
We kind of discussed what we had been discussing in class.
Oh,
Just got different topics that we had been covering. So we talked about the three ones that he hit on was belonging, redlining, and so it's going to go.
And the achievement gap.
and the achievement gap. Okay, cool. And did he talk about his current work in working with Marnita's table? Did he talk about that? No. Okay, cool. He does some community activism stuff around bringing communities together around those same topics. So I was hoping he would address that with you all.
He kind of hit around the bush on that.
Okay.
So he didn't really talk about
He
it.
didn't really talk about it. Okay, cool. Well, if you want to know more about that, you can go to my podcast, and there's a whole thing I did on his employer, Marnita. So, cool. I do know that there was some language discussion. Did he talk about language at all, and how words are used and that kind of stuff? Cool. I'm not exactly sure what the context of everything was, but I will say that it is important for all of us to use people first language, right? So I'm not a handicapped person because my handicap isn't me. I'm a person with either special needs or a person, with a handicap or however, but I'm a person first, and then I'm something else later. The same goes with all those other things, right? So I'm a person of color as opposed to a colored person because my color isn't blah, 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 that kind of stuff, right? So I'm not a gender of, whatever. I don't know any other ways that those things work out, but person first language is a simple rule that I use around all sorts of interactions with other human beings. So So cool. So we're heading towards the finish line. Our final exam dates are May 22nd or 24th, and I don't care which ones you come to because it'll be the same, right? So I think May 22nd is a Tuesday, and I think the 24th is a Thursday. And so from 11:30 to 1:30. And we're starting to head towards that home stretch. So I wanted to make sure that we're keeping in mind some of the theoretical kind of underpinnings of this idea of closing this achievement gap or building equity in schools and some of the theorists that we've kind of talked about, right? So we'll spend some time this week talking about culturally responsive pedagogy, and that's associated with Dr. Geneva Gay. So if you don't have that in your notes, you might want to get that in your notes. I will tell you, though, you've already addressed these in the presentations that you've done, right? So if you need a refresher, you can go right back to the presentations that you've already done and get a refresher on some of these names. So Yuri Brobson-Brenner, what was his contribution? What was his contribution? The ecological systems model, right? And what does that mean? What was Yuri's point of the ecological systems model? Or how did his model work?
There's different circles of influence. So like people who are closest to you, like your family, your friends, and then like the other circle, like your school, and then the laws that are going on at that time that you're alive. Just different circles.
Yeah. So context, right? That people operate, grow, and develop in context. And he also says in this model that context also does what? Is context static? No, it constantly changes. And so that growth and that development that is contextual is also changing over time, right? So that's what he offers. Lewis Moll offers the funds of knowledge. And what do we say about the funds of knowledge? And what's the overarching premise of this idea of funds of knowledge? So as you walk into this classroom, are you empty cups waiting to be filled with the great knowledge that I have for you? Absolutely. That makes me feel good. Alex, what do you think? Are you an empty cup?
Yeah.
No, you're not an empty cup, right? You come with stuff. You already know how to do things. And so this idea of funds of knowledge really is asking teachers and leaders to draw upon the knowledge that people already have, right? So as an example, in Head Start in Anoka County, they speak over 20 languages at home, which means that there are things that the kids certainly know at home that we could capitalize on in the classroom, right? So that's important. Funds of knowledge. That there are things that our students and our families already know that we can capitalize on, right? And then the Rosenthal effect. What is the Rosenthal effect? Or the Pygmalion effect? What do we say about that? Yes.
Higher expectations lead to an increase in performance.
High expectations lead to increase in performance. And what's the other part of that? Low expectations, low performance, right? So people rise and fall to expectations, or there's a self-fulfilling prophecy is another way to think about that, the self-fulfilling prophecy. And then we talked about Alfred Adler and human motivation. And what are we attributing, or what does Adler have to offer to this idea of this culturally responsive kind of pedagogy that we've been talking about in terms of what human beings are after, or the motives of human beings? What are the three things that we said that human beings are after? Safety, significance, and belonging, right? Safety, significance, and belonging. And do human beings all look to get those things the same way? Say it loud.
No.
No, they don't, right? No, they don't. So what causes human beings to try to get safety, significance, and belonging differently? Or why is it that they try to get it differently? Goals, right? So part of it is people's goals, right? So people have different goals. What else do they have that creates this kind of differentiation? Culture and context are also different, right? You guys are smart, right? And good looking. Right? So Albert Adler offers us this human motivation of safety, significance, and belonging, and that goals and culture and context kind of drive those things, right? In the other class, they talked about, I guess, Dante had talked about this idea that Maslow's hierarchy should start differently, that it should start with this relationship kind of thing. And one thing that I shared with the other class was that there is this idea of high context and low context, right? And so in a high context culture, context is everything, right? So group relationships are extremely important. Group dynamics are important. In a low context, the individual is more important, right? Or the individual's thoughts and rights and all these kinds of things are more important. And so when we use that, when we look at a high context culture, where the context is important, what do we say about this fish? So this is the group. The group of fish is here. What gets said about this fish? So if the group is important, group dynamics is important, what about that fish that's out front? What gets said about that fish? What's that?
He's the leader.
He gets called the leader?
He's a part of the school.
He's an outcast. And why is he an outcast? Because he's not a part of what everybody else is doing, right? And in high context. But in low context, all the fish are doing this, and then there's this one fish out here doing this. What do we call this fish?
The leader?
Yes, we call him the leader, right? So when we talk about the idea of this low context, the individual outside of the group then becomes the leader. It's celebrated, blah, blah, blah. And so what I believe he was trying to get after is this idea of high context and low context culture. And what we recognize that in Western societies, this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that you have to get your safety significant, your physical safety, your relational safety, or your physical safety, and then ultimately you self-actualize, right? You know how good you are or bad at things, is really a Western model, but oftentimes an Eastern way of looking at things, that if you know yourself yes.
I'll let you finish, and then I have something to say.
Okay, cool. So now I'm like in suspense myself. I don't even want to say what I gotta say. I'm gonna hear what you gotta say. But it's an inverted triangle, meaning that ultimately the highest level you can get, kind of in the Eastern way of thinking, is that all of these needs get met because you have relationships with people, you know yourself, Where in a Western model, knowing yourself is the highest level of achievement in society. Go ahead.
What he was saying was there's new research that says that the second stage, which is the belonging, that's actually the first stage, because if you don't belong, you can't get those physiological needs met. So that's kind of what he was.
So he did address it in your.
Yes.
Okay.
He did address that, and he specifically was talking about that the bottom two layers should be flipped in reality, and that there's new research saying that that's the way the hierarchy should look, instead of the physiological needs at the bottom, having them above belonging, having belonging on the bottom.
Yeah. So I just like I can't rebuke Paul. So some people try to do this. Paul was wrong on this, that, or the other. So I can't talk about the model itself, but what I can offer is a different way of kind of thinking about how that model was developed. So yeah, I like to see that data he's talking about and experience that stuff. But I do know that this high context, low context culture piece is a dynamic piece. So there is that. Let me check my time. Okay, cool. All right, cool. So we've kind of talked about these practitioners, these philosophers, these people who've given us roots for the work. I also want to come back up here and talk about this idea of the adverse childhood experiences, right? And I want to give you a handout that kind of talks about the adverse childhood experiences. When we've talked about that before, what do you recall about our discussion about adverse childhood experiences? What do you recall about our discussion about adverse childhood experiences?
It's like a questionnaire with 10 questions, and then if you like answer yes to the question that's being asked, and then there's like different categories of like questions, and if it happened to you, you grew up in a situation where that was present, you get a point, and then the more points you have, the higher the ACE score you have, which then is been found like with things like different diseases, heart issues, a bunch of things in your later life, like why they might be happening, or like
Why those things might be happening.
there's like why there might be like a correlation between them.
Oh, yes. How did No, that's good. That's good. So it is. It's a study that was done to I think it's Kaiser Permanente, which I don't want to get that confused with Kaiser Sose. Anybody ever seen what was the name of the movie? Yeah, the Usual Suspect. Anybody seen that? Okay, cool. It's a really good movie, actually. I enjoyed it. You know, kind of like what's the one? I see dead people. Yeah, Sixth Sense, kind of like that same. It has the same kind of feel to the movie a little bit, but at any rate, so these ACEs are these impacts that people can have, and I would say these are blockages or could be trauma-inducing. And what do we know about trauma? What do we know about trauma? Does it increase the capacity for people to give and serve and be motivated, or does trauma create limits on that? It certainly doesn't help, right? And that trauma can then turn into kind of these long-term stressors, right? You've heard of post-traumatic stress syndrome or disorder, depending on how folks use that, right? So this prolonged exposure to stressful situation has some real both psychological and physiological impacts on human beings, right? So these ACEs create these stressors or the conditions for stressors. And what are the three categories of ACEs? Abuse. Neglect. And dysfunction, right? And there's some and they go into greater detail about those, as well as one of my favorite pictures is this one. Let's see if I still have it up. Yeah. Is this picture or this diagram of ACEs. And you've seen this before, so it's not anything new, but it is one of my favorite. Oh, I guess that's as big as that gets. Ooh, who are you? Who are you? At any rate, so there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. Emotional neglect, physical neglect. There's incarceration, domestic violence, divorce, spousal, all that kind of stuff, right? Domestic issues, mental illness. That was the other one. Mental illness as a part of those ACEs. And so those become some of the how can those become barriers to learning? Let's start there. Can those be barriers to learning, and how can they be barriers to learning? Can those be barriers to learning? Yeah, how? Or why would they be barriers to learning? Please.
If you're getting abused at home, you're probably going to be thinking more about that than the math lesson.
Okay, so if you're getting abused at home, you might be thinking about that more than your math lesson. What else?
If you're neglected, you might not be getting like the attention you need, or like you're abandoned and you aren't getting food, you won't be able to like focus.
Yeah, so either your basic needs in terms of Maslow's hierarchy are certainly not getting met if you feel or if you are being neglected. Yes.
If you are an older sibling and your parents are not around, then you need to be responsible for that. So you're thinking of them, you're not thinking of your physics project that you're supposed to be working on.
Yeah, so your allegiances, your mind is divided between this caretaking stuff and the other things that you have going on. Yes.
There can be a lack of trust in people.
Yeah, a lack of trust in people, right? Something else that's very interesting is that I've never met a young person who said, you know what, when I grow up, I want to be addicted to drugs. Like, I've never met anybody who ever said that was like their goal, right? I would suggest that many of these things kind of set the stage for aberrant behaviors, right? I've never met a young person who said, you know what, when I get older, I want to sleep around with a whole lot of people, right? That in terms of a goal, I've never heard that as a goal, but oftentimes some of these things drive people to do that. And self-medication is really what people oftentimes are after by all sorts of illicit behavior, right? Even adrenaline junkies. That's a form of self-medication too, right? Extremist kinds of behaviors. So important stuff. So yeah, these can become barriers, particularly in the classroom. So if I go to the doctor and the doctor tells me, Andre, your arm is broken, what's the next thing I expect to come out of the doctor's mouth?
Here's how we'll fix it.
This is how we'll fix it, right? So if the doctor came, if I went to see the doctor and he said, Andre, your arm is broken, I'll see you next week. You're like, dude, what? You know, like, man, can you hook me up something? So what I like to offer is that I do believe that these adverse childhood experiences are problematic. They cause trauma, and are detrimental to students and their lives, particularly in circles of high poverty, low resources, all sorts of other social combinations. So what I like to offer is this idea that the 40 developmental assets are ways that we build skills in young people, right? Is there anybody in your family that people say, that person is strong? Do you have a person like that in your family? They say, that person is strong. Was that person born strong? Or did they learn to be strong? They learned it, right? They learned how to be strong. And how did they do this? So what does that say about being strong? However that's defined in your family system. What does that then mean? If they weren't born that way, yes.
For me, like my dad, I say he's strong, like physically, but also just the way he was raised. Like he started driving like in the family business like at 13, and just like was abused as a kid. So like I think for that he's strong because like his experiences have shaped him to be mentally strong.
Yeah, mentally strong, physically strong, right? Because they were able to do, and I thought it was interesting. You said that he was abused as a kid as a part of this idea of being strong. What does that have to do with what does that past stuff have to do with him being strong today?
Well, I think that like nowadays, like kind of kids, more so it's more common to be raised like you're pampered, like most people at Bethel, I'd say, versus like back when my parents were kids, it was more common to like get hit with a belt. I mean, as bad as that is to say, so I feel like that definitely changes like how you like your upbringing, like changes kind of your personality.
Yeah.
How you think of things and view things.
Yes.
But also like for them to be, I don't know, like for your dad, like he obviously came out of that, and I think that when kids are abused, and I mean if you look at the rate like or neglected, or their parents do drugs, or all of these things, and there's so much dysfunction that they stay stuck in this dysfunction, so it keeps going on throughout generations, and like to be strong and to like say, no, like that's my past, that's my family, but that's not how I'm gonna raise my family, and that's not how I'm gonna move forward in the future.
Yeah. So the ability to bounce back, we refer to that as, is it easier? So first of all, having abuse and neglect and dysfunction in your family, can we heal that? Can we work on that? Can we fix that after somebody's been exposed to that? Can we work on? Yeah, we can. We can work on that, right? What's the easier way to even address this stuff? What's a way to circumvent all of this?
Stuff down.
What's that?
Stuff it down.
She said, "Stuff it down." No. You don't want to stuff it down, right? So stop it before it even starts, right? Stop it before it starts. So part of what I'm about to say is this idea that skills, we want to offer our students skill development, which one way to do that is through resiliency. Resiliency is a skill. That thing that we call, someone being strong really is, particularly in an educational setting, we would call that resilience. And it's a skill you can develop, right? But there are people who don't develop that skill. And so these 40 developmental assets are designed to help us build skills that are resilient, both to this, but also give the folks who've experienced this an opportunity to figure out ways to not let this continue. Or if I'm in this situation, what do I do to keep my own self motivated towards my own goals, right? So I'm going to pass out those 40 developmental assets. Make sure I give everybody enough this time.
Yeah, no, it's, it feels fine,
So what I'd like for you to do is I want you to read over those 40 developmental assets, and I want you to circle the ones that you've had, that you've had access to, right, or have been influential in your own life. So circle the ones out of the 40 that you've had access to or have been influential in your own life. All right. Folks are still working through it. Okay. Cool. What I'd like for you to do now is looking at all of those larger categories of support, empowerment, boundaries, constructive use of time, commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity. I want you, out of all of those 8, I want you to pick 3, and I want you to number those, the 3 that you pick. 1 is most important, 2nd was second important, and 3rd is the 3rd important. So out of those 8, in each of those categories, was your first one, was your second one, or your 3rd one in terms of being influential in your own life? right, I want you to take about 2 minutes to talk with the folks around you about your ones, your twos, and your threes. And any other observations? I'll give just 2 minutes.
Like mine was support for some reason. Two was
I figured it out by the end of high school. And then. I did. And I did.
I just think class
All right, stop right there. Just a couple of notes, and then I will let you go. So hopefully you were able to see, hear other people's developmental assets and how they impacted them. You're able to look at your own, and now we're going to apply these in our final case study. And so we went through all that case study stuff before, kind of building towards this big case study that we're going to do. And so there are four. We're going to watch this documentary in. Let me see if I can find it. It's in it's in Google. It's called Boys of Baraka. And there are four characters that I want us to kind of do a case study in our case study subjects. And the first is, so if you go to the course, and you'll see that it's film reflection entries. Right under that is Boys of Baraka. The case study. And so if you want to start watching the film, you can. We're going to spend some time on Friday watching the film. But these are the four individuals that I want you to pay attention to in this particular film. Richard and Romesh, they are two brothers. And what I want you to take notes on is what ACEs, according to the chart, are they experiencing? What ACEs are they experiencing? And what 40 developmental assets do they have, or are they lacking? Right? So if you look on that list and you see some that are obvious that they have, or there are some that you would suggest that they might be lacking, some of those. You don't have to do all 40, but just a few. And then Devon is the next character. And again, what are the ACEs that he faces? And then what are the 40 developmental assets that he either has or are missing? That's the plus or minus. And then Montre, in terms of ACEs, the 40 developmental assets, what does he have and what is he lacking? All right. I have about 5 minutes, so I want to show just this about 5 minute clip of the film to kind of set the tone for what I'm asking you to do.
Do you understand?
Alright, gentlemen, settle down. My name is Miss Jackson. How are you? This is something I want you all to think about, okay? As young men in Baltimore City, most of you have about 3 choices. And 3 things that might happen to you by the time you turn 18. The first thing that you might get is you might get an orange jumpsuit with some nice bracelets that go in your arms. Okay? The second one is a nice black suit with a nice brown box. Think about that one. And then the third one is you might get a nice black gown and a nice cap and a diploma in your hand. Gentlemen, I'm here today to talk to you about the Baraka School. The Baraka School is an all-male boarding school in Kenya, East Africa. Everybody asks me, is this a school for bad children? Is this a boot camp or is this a jail? It's none of those things, okay? This is an educational opportunity, okay? So I want young men who are interested in changing their attitude, their behavior. How many people here have been suspended? Suspended. Isn't that nice? Everybody put your hands down. All of you are not going to graduate from high school. That's why we have programs like Baraka, because we want to make sure that you all succeed. We want to make sure that you all graduate from high school and go to college.
All right, just want to stop there just for a second. What do you, so first of all, what is the purpose of play? What's the purpose of play? To learn? What's the end of that?
Like when you're little, you learn everything through playing. You learn your social skills, you learn how to communicate, you learn language skills.
You learn how to be an adult, right? Yeah. What did you recognize about how they were playing? What games were they playing? Extreme cops and robbers, right? Like TV cops, right? What else? What other games were they playing?
Did they pretend to use drugs at the beginning?
I don't think they were pretending to use drugs, but I do think that they were fighting. I don't know if anyone saw that. They were shooting each other, right? What does their play tell us about their context? If play is designed to teach us how to be adults, what does their play tell us about their context? Yeah, that's what they see happening to adults. And that is the expectation of the kinds of things that will happen to them, right? What did you notice about the school setting? Any aces going on there? Lots of dysfunction going on there, right? And so how which of our theories or theories comes into play, given what we saw in that kind of environment? Which of our theorists or theories start to come into play when we look at Rosenthal effect, right? If I don't have expectations, or what happens if I have too high of an expectation? Don't reach it, right? So it's the same as not having an expectation at all, right? So hopefully you'll start to see how these things can be applied to this particular case study. I'll see you on Friday. Have a great day. No, we'll watch it in class on Friday. We're going to be instructed.
They're saying about well, I personally say that because it says young person about the how much I do or feel like that was truly
Question. So on church, I don't know, I just have like one random thought. You're talking about like things I noticed at church on Sunday. Why did all the women wear black head coverings?
Yeah.
Is that like out of Corinthians?
It is.
Okay. Interesting. Because I was thinking about that. And I was just wondering because I was like, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, cool.
Yeah. So yes, I agree.
I was just wondering if that just happened to be a style thing, or if there's actually.
Yeah. No, it's and for our faith community, it's relatively new.
Really?
So yeah.
Okay.
So really trying to to be biblical.
Yeah.
And there's some growing pains that are associated with that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the research that he was citing as well with the belonging and the other stuff replacing, but I was just, that's what he said.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I like to see it because I'm that kind of
Where
guy.
he's coming from with the logic is, makes sense, but